Welcome back everyone, thanks for joining us. Ultimately, my dream for this channel was to be monetized, and to do that we need to have as many subscribers as possible. So please like, share and subscribe, and here we go with today's show. As you can see here, our shims have arrived and they pretty much fitted out of the box except for a small machining process which I wasted no time doing. Just to open the recess up to house the larger PSI spring that we're running. Now, with these higher RPM engines, the valve springs, the way you set the valve springs up is to have the valve spring coil bind at about 80 or 100 thou after full lift. So if you could imagine there was 300 thou worth of room after full lift, what the spring does is, as it's slammed open by the rocker ratio, the kinetic energy in the spring or in the wire wants to keep going. So as the spring is held between the head and the retainer, it reverberates. So it's almost bouncing in its captive position. And what this does is, at higher RPM, the spring will actually unseat the valve in the consequent following firing strokes. And this on a dyno, say, would appear as the engine nosing over, and sometimes you'll see it on the dyno where the horsepower just drops like a rock, and it's basically the valves aren't sealing on the next firing stroke. So that's a simplified way of putting it. Another interesting point I like to add is, as you can see in this video, I'm wearing gloves to protect, not to protect my hands, not that I'm a sookie la, it's to protect the valve springs, because the oil in your skin, if it gets on those valve springs, and in time, if that sits and it gets a bit of surface rust on that spring from the oil in your skin, that spring will fail, I guarantee it. So a good point of interest for anyone out there, if you're putting an engine together and it's got surface rust on the springs, throw them in the bin, because they will fail. I've seen it a few times now. So very important. And the product I'm using to spray on the springs is a Comp Cams product, and it's specifically made for valve springs, and it just reduces the friction on initial startup, and that heat can destroy the valve springs basically straight away. All these three springs contact one another, so there's a lot of friction, and if that was dry, it turns into heat and exit valve springs, So yeah, as you can see in the photos, that you coat them, and there they are, the shims and the springs assembled. So it's good practice to spray your valve springs, especially on expensive stuff. It's just going to make it last a lot longer. Now that the heads are assembled, we can look at fitting them onto the block. All the head studs are in place and torqued into the block. The stud that you use with an alloy block, or all the alloy blocks I've looked at, have a locator on the end, so you've got to torque them in, 15 foot-pounds. So, and here you can see I'm coating the head stud washers and nuts with ARP assembly lubricant, and this lubricant simply reduces friction between the nut and the washer and the head, so that you know that when you tighten that up to 75 foot-pounds, that that's transferred to clamping force and not the nut and the washer binding up on each other. So it's really important to use a lubricant under the head of the bolt, and whether it be a bolt, a nut, a washer, whatever, just coat them all, and yeah, you're assured that clamping force is transferred to the gasket. Okay, this is an exciting stage for me personally, getting these heads back on, and as you can see, I do use a little bit of silicone in a J sort of pattern on each end of the head. This is where the oil drain back traditionally is, and it just stops any weeping or oil getting out. It wouldn't be an oil leak, it'd just be a stain, I guess, and it's best kept in the engine rather than it coming out. So nothing really radical here. We just everything's clean. clean with thinners, and you do your normal 3 stages, 35 pound, 55 pound and 75 pound in a round outward pattern, working from the center out and nice and evenly torquing the heads down. And I like to, after I finish torquing to 75, I just run over all the bolts, nuts, and just double check that they're all torqued correctly. And here we are putting the rocker stands on. They're torqued down to 35 pounds. And as I've mentioned before, they do have a nice broad bolt pattern, fairly wide bolt pattern. And this will help with a stable valve train. So can't wait, to get this thing running and hopefully put our oiling issue to bed, and giving us confidence going into our first event at the Bend in October. I'm just fitting lash caps here, and quickly I'll explain why we don't use the tie valves with the hardened tips. The way that they're fitted is the hardened tip is spigoted and the end of the valve is drilled, and normally that drilling ends near or around the valve lock groove, and you don't need to be Einstein to work out how that can weaken the valve. So that's why we don't use them. Also, I'd like to just confirm the pushrod length, as we have changed lifters, and I would like to know that the pushrod length hasn't changed. And I use a checking pushrod and a big micrometer to double check the lengths. Okay, we're out of time again. If there's something that you want to see that I haven't covered, please let me know. And as I mentioned before, please subscribe and share the video to all your friends. I'd really appreciate it. See you on the next one.